So I'm sitting here thinking about how over the years, gradually, I've given up fiction more and more. It was really unintentional. I love reading, but at some point, I just didn't really have the time or attention for it. And so I fell out of the habit. And I continued to watch a lot of movies and TV for years and years. And I got a lot from that. And so I didn't really think much of it. I was like, I just don't really have time to read. But then I found I had less and less attention for movies. And maybe this is some sort of attention deficit, and I should be concerned, right? But at the same time, I realized when I wasn't watching movies, I had a lot more time and attention for the other things that I was feeling called to, driven to, pressured to do in my life. And I kind of like that. I didn't want to change the budget back the other way. And so I stayed with it. And then for years and years, I pretty much just watched TV when I could. That became the thing. And it remained reasonably present and influential in my life. I didn't have a lot of time for it, so it didn't take up much of my time. But of the free time I had, I would often be watching a television show. And so this was sort of the last of like my fictional escapes in the world of media. And it wasn't until about 4 years ago I finally was like, I can't even this. I don't have the time, I don't have the attention, I'm not getting what I need from it. And at that point I've become really interested in how the stories we tell ourselves have such a huge influence on our perceptions, our behaviors, our experiences, our outcomes, all of it. And I realized that by taking in other people's stories, it was sort of tainting the narrative that I would be carrying for myself. And I sort of soured on it. I was like, we shouldn't be in this. Now, I did end up reflecting and realizing that there is a time in life where we should expose ourselves to the stories. We should read the books, we should watch the movies, we should watch the TV shows. And I have to admit, I barely even listen to any kind of music anymore, especially lyrical music. Anything that evokes my emotions artificially or gets me thinking about stories, I've really shrunken away from. But I used to love, I put on music and read, I go watch a movie with friends, I relax and watch some TV by myself. Like, I loved this, and I got so much from it, and it was such a good investment of time. It was things I would learn from, and it would raise questions for me. It would give me a chance to see how other people live and what they struggle with, and I really did get a lot from it. So I think when we're younger, when we're still getting a feel for the shape of the world, it's actually a very good investment. But even for young people coming into it, I think there needs to be an awareness and a skill with which we do consume it. And so this is where I can zoom back out to talking about everybody and say that maybe I'm more susceptible than others. Maybe I'm more aware of the susceptibility that we all share. I'm not sure what it is, but I've noticed that I am a little bit influenced by the media I consume, be it movies, books, music, television. It all affects me. And this is much less difficult to tell people nowadays because we understand how social media affects people. But I think we overlook the ways that other influences have a huge impact on us. I've talked before about how the advent of the 24-hour news cycle really changed things. And I recently heard someone make an interesting point. Gosh, I really have to take notes when I listen. I hate not being able to attribute it to the source, but the takeaway was that when we were on broadcast news, on broadcast networks, which were highly regulated, there was a certain standard for the news we were being given. It had to meet certain criteria to be considered news. And when it moved over to cable news and became the 24-hour cycle, that standard no longer applied. So the shift was we were still thinking news, but we were actually getting a different product. And we were getting it at such high doses that it began to have a much more potent effect on the populace. And so I would also say the news is a big part of this. And I think more and more, you can go on Facebook and see what I'm talking about. You can see people who are like swimming in the news all day and then jumping on Facebook to argue about it. It's it's not it's not without impact. So I think that we do have some burgeoning awareness of how much this influences us, but I don't think we're adopting as comprehensive a view of the matter as is necessary to mitigate the ill effects of this influence in our lives. And I want to say the ill effects of it. It is not inherently evil. As I just said, I think when we're young, it's tremendously valuable to be able to connect with the world around us and explore and understand it and ourselves through that process. I think there are other times it's incredibly cathartic. Sometimes we need a little bit of escapism, you know? It's like we all need to like tap out once in a while. There's no shame in that. It's when we make a lifestyle of it. It's when we use it instead of doing the work to process and manage the real matters of our lives. And that's when it becomes problematic in that regard, like dose sensitivity, right? Like how much are you taking of this? That wanting to dip out once in a while is very balanced, it's very healthy, and I don't oppose this. Even I will occasionally take something in, but it's very conscious. It's something I put over there, and I go there when it's time to do that thing, but I reside here where it is not. And the benefit of that, maybe this is the better way of putting it, instead of saying what's the problem, say what's the benefit. For me, the benefit is, one, again, the time and attention I have for all the other matters in my life. It's also being able to filter out other people's narratives from my own. And here's the thing I was saying about being susceptible. I find that unwittingly I start comparing my life to the life of the characters I've just spent an hour with, right? Like I just watched an episode, or maybe it's a few hours, I watched a movie, or it's several days I've been reading a book, or it's this whole season I've been tuning in to see what happens with people. And we're naturally empathetic, and in real life we see people smile, we see people scowl, we wonder what's up. We have these mirror neurons that connect us to other people's experiences so that we can experience empathy and operate from that place with others to create good social connections, and all of that's great for our survival. So this is a good thing that we do, but it gets a little bit hijacked, for me at least, when I'm deep into a show or a movie or a book, even sometimes music. It really can affect me. And this is entirely fictional stuff, which is why I set the news over here. It's not entirely fictional, it's predominantly true with, as we know, a certain spin. But even just truly, purely fictional matters will affect me. I'll start to feel for people, I'll think about it, I'll start to compare my life and my experiences and compare the world I live in to the world they live in, which is part of why it's beneficial when we're young. It helps us map things and explore the edges of things in a safe, low-cost way. And at the same time, when I'm at the stage of trying to solidify the core elements of myself, I need to filter out these other influences, because I'll get drifting into it unintentionally. And we've talked about comparison not only being the thief of joy, but the thief of clarity. And it muddies the edges for me of where my life actually is and where I need to operate, and how I can go about that in real life, where a director can't call cut and do another take, right? Like, and where the storyline isn't neatly tied up for whatever period of time, that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's not how life works. And I think there's subtle influences. It's not just that I start getting caught in the characters and then comparing myself and my life to that. It's that the format almost creates an artificial expectation of like, well, these guys in the storyline had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in the big picture, we do, but in life, it's all these little micro story arcs that kind of leapfrog and overlay with one another. And it's not as clean a story arc, and I think we sort of expect that. I've heard that from relationship coaches saying that in the world of dating, a lot of people are looking for that story they can tell about how we met and we knew it was the one and it was magical and like, they're turning down good things because they're trying to write a story instead of create a reality. And that's just one example that comes to mind about how I think it influences our formatting of the formatting of our expectations, right? Where we're like, oh, there should be a tidy story arc, and then you can roll the credits, and then everybody's rocking out happily ever after, right? Like, this warps our expectations, and I'm trying to subtract those things, and in subtracting them, I have the space and the time to think about what does the story arc really look like, and how do I engineer my life to move within that effectively, to tell the best story within each of those little arcs, but more to the point, to come out to where the next chapter begins on good footing, and to always sort of be like a step ahead. You've really got to be playing chess out here. You can't just be thinking from like here to the end of your nose. You really have to be able to go out, at least for me, to do what I need to do in my life and get the results I would choose. I got to be thinking moves ahead, and in being able to separate out the pre-formatted stories of others, right? I can then kind of figure out my own format and figure out what kind of stories I want to write and where I want them to bring me, such that the story doesn't end, but rather each chapter leads to the next in a way that it's compelling. And it's a real, I want my life to be a page turner, but not according to somebody else's fiction. And this is part of being in reality. This is part of being real with what is. This is part of being sane and healthy and having it all come together in the way that, the map matches the territory, and we can navigate and arrive at the points where we want to be when that is most advantageous to us, and we stop feeling that we are at the mercy of everything else, and start to realize that we actually have a lot of influence, especially over our posture. Here, let me sit up a little. Feel my diaphragm getting crushed. Affects my voice. Okay, reset. So, within telling these stories, we need to be careful of who's weaving their stories into that, and know that at times it is to our benefit to take on other people's stories and learn and explore, and sometimes just escape through that. That's fine. But also to understand that it's going to dilute our connection with our own personal reality, our own felt experience, whatever. It's that. It's that we have something within us that we need to be able to really listen to deeply, hear it clearly. And the more we can do that, the more we can achieve a certain kind of sanity and peace and efficacy. We want to be effective in this world and be able to like hatch a plan and see it through as much as any plan survives first contact. Like as soon as it hits the ground in reality, it probably needs to be modified. But in the way that we at least come with clear and, I want to say good intention, but it's more than good intention. It's wise, informed, sound intention based on consistent values that are not at the expense of others in any kind of unjust way. Because, all right, here's another thing. Speaking of stories we tell ourselves, and me not being able to attribute things to people correctly, somebody was saying that there are no solutions, only compromises, right? And this is the thing, like, whatever we come up with is going to have both desirable and undesirable outcomes in some way. You have to break an egg to make an omelet, right? So in that, pardon me, in that sense, there are going to be some things we don't want. And this is what I mean about wise and sound and informed decisions that we make for ourselves, because we have to account for that. We can't just go with the glossy thing we saw on the big screen in the dark room. We have to really be able to pull up look at the heads-up display in our own psyches and be like, all right, if I follow this out, what happens? And it's a little bit less of telling a story and more about charting a course, and then letting the story sort of unfold as you move along that course over time. And I think story becomes the accounting after the fact if you're doing it right. It's not the concept from which you operate going into a situation. It's the fruit of an after action review that says, like, okay, what went down? How did that work? Where did it go off the rails? Who is responsible for the achievements and the failures? How do we learn from that? What do we apply to the next experience? And that becomes the story after we've had the experience. But if we go into the experience trying to manifest a story we've already produced inside of our own imagination, it's going to be a jagged and awkward fit if it fits at all. And this is something else I'm exploring a lot lately, where there's a critical balance between surrender and action. And surrender cannot be a fully passive thing. It has to be willfully giving over our story, our ideas, to whatever actually is in the moment. Say, I have this idea, but let me park that over there and go to where this moment is happening as it is, beyond my control, and be in it and with it. And then I can look at the story as a reference point and say, is there something in there that I want to bring to my small bit of influence I have to bear upon this as it is? And that's sort of how we launch ourselves into the current that is what we must ultimately surrender to. You kind of choose where along the riverbank to jump into the flow of the water, but then the best thing to do is to go gently with that flow as you're moving through the river. And when you come to a place, to know it's time to grab a hold of a branch or a rock and get to shore. It's this relationship between knowing when it's time to actively move toward a place and be in an assertive and active way with it, and when it's time to let go and float to the next place. And this is part of letting the story unfold. And obviously I haven't worked this out. I've been wrestling with it all week, and I'm having a hard time really figuring out how to say that the key, the takeaway is that we do have to find the balance between surrender and action. And by surrendering the story, I think we're already halfway there. We're already saying, look, I've got this idea in my head. I know what I'd like, but let's put that aside, because I don't really know what's good for me. I don't know what's around the bend. I don't know what beneficial thing happened today that's going to cost me tomorrow. I don't know what costly thing happened today that's going to pay out tomorrow. I don't really know. Surrender my sense that I know what's best and I know how this is all going to fit together, and hold instead to my ability to carry my core values and intentions with me when I'm floating gently down the stream, merrily, 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 merrily. And perhaps life is but a dream, but we have a role to play in that dream. We are all players. But is it strutting and fretting our time across the stage? I just butchered Shakespeare. You're welcome. Anyway, there's something about that. So, yeah, we've all been working this out a while. I'm not the first guy to show up here and question these things. Obviously, the bard himself was working out a lot of these questions a long time ago, and he was walking in the footsteps of ancient philosophers who preceded him, and there are surely people who considered this before they had a way to capture the thoughts, because this is the human condition, and that's the greatest story we can be part of. And I think that we actually lose something by reducing it to these fictions that we become rightfully emotionally charged about, that we become attached to, because this is how we are, and it's a sign that we are healthy and we're open, we're empathetic, we can connect and reflect. These are good things, but we also have to be responsible. This goes back to saying we all have to have the skills to take responsibility, to not allow those drives, those responses to be hijacked in such a way that it taints the core narrative we need to carry with us wherever we are. And when I say core narrative, it's really just the fundamentals of knowing that I am this person. I have to do these things for this organism that I am. I have to do these things for the psyche that I am, my spirit, my mind, my emotions. They have to be cared for. I have to be able to operate in the world as an environment, a natural environment, and I have to operate in the world as a social environment. I need to be able to, it's really breaking down what's the story of that. Where are you going and why are you going there? What do you carry with you? What do you live through? And through this, we become our own heroes, our own heroines, whatever. We become the protagonist of our own stories that we write, and those are going to fit in life and accomplish more for more people than trying to like reverse engineer and like force fit somebody else's story to run effectively in our own lives, in our own little bit of experience here. And I feel that the benefit of subtracting fiction and even news and a lot of social media, I'm very selective about how I use social media too, just reducing all of that really creates like a clear, quiet space. It's like what is it? It's like a clean room or something where they work on the components for computers. It has to be like dust free, static free. They're doing some delicate work, and I feel like when you come to this part of the work of the self, it really helps to have a clean room, so you're not picking up other people's static charge, you're not getting other people's dust in your chips, right? Like, you want to be able to operate, and I think that this isn't fiction is good or bad. I think it has its virtues, and I think it has its perils, and if we are aware of that and approach with that in mind, and we come with the skill to say, I know why I'm engaging with this, I know what it is I want from this, I know how much I'm going to let it infiltrate my own sense of self and the world, and I'm also aware that there's a point at which I have to limit that. I have to protect what's going on here. Being able to manage that is what's going to determine whether it's for better or for worse that we consume media, and any media. But I've been focused on fiction primarily, and so it's bringing me back to talking about story. And as I've discussed elsewhere, the stories we tell ourselves shape our inner reality, which then tune what it is, what kind of frequency we're transmitting on, and what kind of signal we're sending. And when we are in a good place and we're transmitting good things, we draw other good things to us. And when we are not aligned and we're not transmitting, we're just sending out static and noise and feedback, we repel things. We push away what's possibly good, and sometimes even attract what is undesirable through that beacon. We draw what we signal. And so being able to get that story right and carry that into the world in a way that you show up and you say, okay, this is me, this is what I've got, this is what I'm going to show up with, this is how much I'm going to lay on the line when I walk in there. This is how much I'm going to open to others bringing theirs. And you come in with that, and then you jump in the river and you surrender to the flow, and you let the the exchange just transpire. You just let go and let the exchange transpire. You go with it moment to moment. You're not trying to make anything happen. You're not trying to tell a story. That's when some of the more interesting stories happen, by the way. It's not because you met on a dating app and you went to this particular restaurant and then you went for that walk along that particular boardwalk, or that's not that's not where the great stories happen. It's where you just happen to like have a moment with a stranger and something clicks. And that's how you make all kinds of connections in life. Sometimes it's just people you talk to, more often than not, someone you're just going to talk to for a few minutes, and then life's going to go on, you'll part ways, and you'll lose each other in the big sea of humanity. Other times you'll get to be friends, or you'll establish a business connection, or through them you'll meet someone else who becomes another kind of connection in your life, or you could even find a romantic partner this way. And through going out and just having these experiences and surrendering our story about what's supposed to happen here. Stop telling stories about how other people see us. Stop telling stories about like how awful we are and how people are going to find out we're all awful. And let's just assume everybody knows that. But let's also remember everybody's awful, and we know that too. And we're all in this mess, like flailing around doing our best. And maybe we can like reach to each other and be like, yeah, I know it's a hard time. I'm working it out too. How about you? You need a hand? Like just sort of be on that level and connect at that very real eye level kind of way. You're just like on the same plane, looking at each other from the same sort of place, and allowing humanity to have a chance to show through and to form connections, to tell real stories that aren't these superimposed fairy tales, fantasies, these sweet little delusions that take us out of reality, which I just said are probably good for us sometimes, but we have to be able to wield that effectively. We have to be able to say, this is time for me to pick up fantasy and enter it and play and step outside of this reality for a little while for any number of reasons. And now it's time for me to set this down and put 2 feet solid in the functional day-to-day world, where I do have to operate with myself and others such that I can survive the natural and the social environments that I inhabit, such that maybe I can contribute something to that and elevate the quality of life all around. And yeah, I don't want to criticize anything to do with fiction, fantasy, any of it. I'm just saying that we need to apply another layer of care to selecting and consuming this material such that we keep those 2 things separate and can bring them together appropriately, that we don't end up hijacked by these fantasies, by these stories, and then go out there with the wrong map, getting lost in the actual territory where there may be dragons, but there may also be treasure. And the more we can actually know where we are in life, the more we can know what it is and be with that, the more powerful we become. The more we recognize, this is what I've got within my reach, and I will pick it up and do what is necessary with that. And I will release what is beyond that, and I will move with it as wisely and effectively as I can. You're winning. You're super powerful. You are almost as much as you can be in just doing that. And these are the kinds of stories that I would encourage us to write for ourselves. And I feel that I've benefited from tremendously in adopting this kind of storytelling over that which is prepackaged and sold to us as an ideal or something exemplary, or even, it's implied that it's attainable, and in most cases it's not. It's not. There's no evidence that this is how life works. When there's a crisis, there's not some guy in bare feet at the top of a tower, like, fighting all the bad guys alone. That's like, I love Die Hard, but that's not how it works, And love doesn't happen by, like, a magical chance experience that two soulmates cross paths at just that moment. There can be a magic to that experience, but that's not what builds an enduring relationship. That's just what writes a love story for now. And that happens. You get little love stories for now sometimes, but then we confuse that with the happily ever after that is also not really how it works. We don't really get a happily ever after. We get the happiest we can be right now. And I think we race past that happiest we can be right now moment where the real experience lies, trying to get to that happily ever after, which can never be attained. And then the story we tell ourselves is that we're doing it wrong, or life's not fair, or someone put us at a disadvantage and that's why we can't have this thing. It's all delusional. None of that's real. That's all fiction too, and it's not helpful fiction. And that I would speak against. It would be calling out the stories we tell ourselves and saying, yeah, is that so? Really? Is that true? Is that demonstrably true? Can we actually present evidence to support that claim? Can we provide evidence to refute that claim? And put it down and weigh it out and say, how much is this a true story? And how much is this a work of fantasy? And to have clarity in that, I think will help us to set expectations, align our perceptions, clean up and shore up our values, know where we must take action and where we must surrender, know where we can connect and where we need to keep the gate securely closed. We need to be able to work through these things and craft experiences that ultimately yield the stories of our lives rather than trying to have a life story and manifest it. So, alright, I'm starting to go in circles here, but there was something about that, and I wanted to explore the power of story and fiction and fantasy and how they all have their benefits, but we also need to be responsible for them in the way that they can also be detrimental. And by applying the power of story effectively, we can really benefit, but we have to become a little more clear and sober and wise in the way we do take on other people's stories and ultimately craft our own. Okay, that's what I got for that. I certainly didn't mean to go on this long, but I'm trying to unpack it as I go, and that's what I got so far. So thank you for coming along, and I'll look forward to seeing what comes around the next bend. Alright, take care.